Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad to have you. As you're getting logged in, put a message in the chat box of who you are and where you're logging in from. We're so excited to have you join our first lead session. So come on in. Hi, Deb. Welcome. Hi, Katie Gale. Fun to have you. Hi, Whitney. Hi, Marty. Hi, Nico. Oh, we love Fort Collins. Hi, Jeff. Oh, it's so good to see you. Hi, Diane. Molly. We were just talking about Oregon. We are praying for you all. Hi, Paul. Welcome, welcome. Well, as you are getting logged in, tell us where you're from. My name is Lena Martz. I am the admissions counselor for our online programs here at Life Pacific University. And I am thrilled to welcome you to our first lead session called Bridging the Leadership Gap. Today we're going to be hearing from Life Pacific University President Angie Richey, as well as Foursquare General Supervisor Wendy Nolasco. Hi, Steve. It's fun to see you. It's been a while. Hi, Chuck, Jesse, Bob. Oh, you guys, this is so wonderful. It's so good to see you all here. So if you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar, you have two choices today. You can make comments in the chat as you're doing now, telling us where you're from. Hi from Vegas. And you can also post in the Q&A feature. So if you have a question for the panelists, Angie or Wendy, throughout the program, you may put a question into the Q&A feature, and that'll just go to them. So it won't get lost in all of the chat feature. But you are free to use the chat the whole time if you would like, and engage with one another, engage with us. We are so glad to have you here. So welcome. Oh, it's so good to have you all here. We are waiting for just a second while we get everybody in. We're expecting over 200 people on our webinar today, so it's fun to see that most of you have gotten on without a problem. Hello, Kansas. Oh, hi, Rufus, one of our alum. It's good to see you. Hi, Lynette, Bruce. Hi, Caleb. From the Heartland District. We have people from all over the country, all over the world logged in today. It's very fun to see you all. So welcome, welcome. Well, folks are getting logged in. And as they are, feel free to say hi to your friends who are logging in from all over the country. Oh, it's so great. Hi from Charlotte. Look at all our North Carolina friends. All of our Oregon friends. You guys, it's so good to see you. Thank you for joining us today. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. It's my joy and pleasure to be able to introduce you to our panelists today, our Foursquare General Supervisor, Wendy Nolasco, who is calling in from Austin, Texas. Wendy is a leader and a learner and a passionate gatherer of people, and I can attest to this. Wendy is a phenomenal student in our Master's in Strategic Leadership program, and she has a deep love for Jesus and a commitment to serve his plans and build his church. And I love that she is passionate about developing people. She wants to multiply disciples. She wants to develop us. And I love that so much. So we're excited to have you on, Wendy. Welcome. We're also excited to have President Angie Richey with us today. Angie is the president of Life Pacific University. You may not know that she is also a licensed marriage and family therapist with her own private practice on the side, because what college president doesn't have time for a practice on the side? She's been an educator for 20 years, and the combination of her education experience and her therapy experience and her higher education experience is the perfect combination for her to be our president. She's recognized as a voice in Christian higher education and in ministry, so we are thrilled to have her with us today. President Angie, would you kick us off today?
Absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world. I see so many friends. I see alumni, current students. I see women that I went to Israel with, business owners, board members. You know what? We are just pumped. And I'm incredibly excited to have this conversation. We're going to have a presentation, but a conversation with my good friend, Wendy Nolasco, the new General Supervisor of the Foursquare Church, and a fellow Enneagram 8. And we will see who can take up more airspace today. But I'm very excited that she's on it. We want this to bring a lot of value to all of you. So one thing that I do want to share as we go is we want to make sure by the time you leave that you have something to take with you to implement today that would make your life a little easier, a little better, especially in bridging that leadership gap. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not turbulence. It's to act with yesterday's logic. That's Peter Drucker. So Wendy and I are going to dive in today, and we're all facing problems, right? Is this a season of problems? I believe they do come with solutions. As you look at the next slide, kind of see the landscape. COVID-19 has drastically changed our communities, our churches, places of work, and more, and things look different than they did even 6 months ago. So I'm coming from an organizational leadership perspective, Christian higher ed, where we raise up, really educate young leaders for the church, the workplace, and the world, meaning that this educational experience should lead to a job and ministry placement. And what we've seen, the research has shown, is there's a big skills gap. And so my team and I have worked really hard the last year in trying to fill that gap with the implementation of core life skills at the university, so that our students aren't just learning that theology and that education, that psychology in the classroom, but they're learning how to lead in the world and how to manage themselves and those soft skills that we'll talk about today. But that's my context. And so that's some of the ways that I will be communicating today, is how do we raise up the next generation to fill the gap in the workplace as well as in our own lives. And so Wendy, I want you to jump on here and talk about your context working in leadership and in ministry.
Thank you so much, Angie, for the invitation to be with everyone. And thank you for all of you who are participating. Super pumped to get to see your names kind of popping through from all different spheres of influence and leadership. I am coming from the perspective of really a ministry context, nonprofit space, and even as the church and the face of the church is diversifying in its expressions, that is becoming a little more complicated and as it gets teased out. But primarily, really, as we know the church context and really expansion of ministry and kingdom, that's kind of the perspective of which I'm looking at this.
So let's just dive right in, everyone. We're going to go over 4 skills that Wendy and I believe are absolutely crucial. It's supported by literature, by some of the recent research pre-COVID as well as post-COVID. So get your pen and paper out, and we are going to dive in. So the first skill that we're going to need to navigate the days ahead is emotional intelligence. And I'm going to lean into the role of empathy. I love this quote by Dr. Daniel Goleman, who really is popularized emotional intelligence. And he says this: self-absorption in all its forms kills empathy, let alone compassion. When we focus on ourselves, our world contracts as our problems and preoccupations loom large. But when we focus on others, our world expands. Our own problems drift to the periphery of the mind and so seem smaller. And we increase our compassion, our connection, or compassion for action. So really, emotional intelligence is a broader term that is comprised of about 5 main components, which include self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and soft skills. When we talk about the leadership gap, this piece is crucial, and honestly, the research shows the gap is widening. So for all of us on this call today, if we want to bridge that gap, we need to dive into what does it mean to be an emotionally intelligent leader. an emotionally intelligent discipler. Empathy is interesting because for leadership and for leaders of all companies, organizations, it's critical to managing a successful team or organization. And what is empathy? It's the ability to put ourselves in someone else's situations. If you Google empathy and Google the top companies in the world, most leaders will have a quote on the importance of empathy. And so we can't devalue the ability to relate and to be sensitive to another person's context. You know, I have a friend, Charles Lee. He's awesome. Y'all probably all know him, but he always reminds me, he goes, Angie, we have to remember what does the customer need? We have to empathize with the client so that we can meet that need. So why do we need empathy? 3 things, not going to dive too deeply. Number 1, empathy leads to connection. If you've studied Brené Brown, we know that vulnerability is the pathway to connection, and empathy also reinforces that connection. So empathy builds bridges. People just want to know how much you care. And as leaders in the crisis that we're in, we have to remember that now more than ever. Number 2, empathy allows for insight. When we empathize with what someone else is going through, we hear their story, their needs, their challenges, their home life, their own gaps. Guess what? We can get to work and begin to have insight into solutions. So what that means, it leads to strategy. Empathy is very important. It's a number 1 skill we need. And for those that are raising up the next generation, if we want our students and our young leaders to not only get the job, but keep the job, they're going to have to grow in the area of emotional intelligence. I'm going to turn to the next slide real quick, and I want to just highlight a few more things, and then I'd love Wendy to kind of give a few thoughts to this. But I love, you know, I'm a therapist, so in this season especially, been walking a lot of people, even staff, through grief. And so here is the Kubler-Ross change curve, grief and loss, but it's overlaid basically for organizational leadership and management. And isn't this interesting? When employees or staff or family members go through change, they experience grief. What I love about this graphic is for every stages of the grief and change cycle, there is a strategy. And an emotionally intelligent leader looks at, where are the people that I'm leading? Where are the people that I'm serving? And how can I best meet that need or empower them in the area of their emotional state at that time? So let's look at this first one. You'll see that shock, surprise, an event, everything that's happened with COVID, the pandemic, the racial challenges. Now we have fires. It's raining ash right now here in California. This is a time for creative alignment. When people that you're serving are going through frustration, denial, frustration, this is absolutely the time to maximize communication. This is not a time to pile on more work. It's time to increase clarity. Now, when your staff or people that you're leading are depressed or feeling hopeless or feeling like this is never going to end, this is where we as leaders need to bridge that gap to spark motivation. When they get into experimentation, some of us as leaders, we went right into experimentation and decision making, whereas we left the rest of our teams behind. But you might have some staff members that are like adaptable, they're resilient. This is a time to let them run, because it's times like this where leaders are not only made, but they're found. You discover people and gifting, and you want to empower that. So you want to develop capacity, get ideating, building in that piece, and then when you get to more of acceptance, share that knowledge. So number 1 skill we need is emotional intelligence and empathy. Where are the people in your lives right now? How are they doing? Are you meeting them where they're at, and are you talking to their need? Wendy, I know this is big for you as you're dealing with so many churches and pastors that some are doing really well, but some are really struggling. Where do you see the need for empathy in your context?
Everywhere, Angie. That is so good. Emotional intelligence is quickly rising to one of the top leadership skills You have to be emotionally intelligent to navigate the landscape and context of the day. You hit it on the head. We quickly move, especially Enneagram 8s, right? We quickly move to experimentation, decision-making, and assume that everyone has emotionally adapted and is ready to go. And that's a lot of times where our strategies fall flat because people still haven't been processed through good emotional intelligence matrix.
And this emotional intelligence work doesn't happen overnight. So I would just want to encourage everyone to first is acknowledge maybe some personal incompetence. This is a growth area, and just name it, no shame, but get going on it. And maybe that means a coach, maybe it means therapist, maybe it means a spiritual director, maybe it means opening up a Daniel Goleman book. You know, we have a friend of ours, Dr. Jared Roth. He wrote his dissertation on emotional intelligence and leaders. Dr. Gail Samples at Life Pacific as well wrote her dissertation on emotional intelligence. So there's people that you can really lean into and get some content about that. So Wendy, this is number one. You've got number two. Go for it. What's number two? I'm ready. I'm taking notes.
Thank you so much. Okay, so skill number two to navigate the leadership gap today would be technology competence. I would say that leaders must have technology competence today. This is no longer something that is novel. It's no longer experimental. It's no longer even ancillary. It's really central to the context, specifically in the church world. This was an early lesson for those in COVID, and it's got a lot of implications. So we're going to kind of just tease out So first quality would be, the H would be a humility. You'll hear me beat this drum over and over. You addressed it. Acknowledging personal incompetence, acknowledging zones of incompetence is really essential. This is the basic practice of moving from being an expert to being a learner. And there's a lot of research that has been done around the parts of your mind that are opened and engaged when you move into a learner's seat rather than an expert seat. So I would underscore that we must have that mindset, especially if we're not comfortable in the area of technology. For a lot of leaders who have been adapted to water cooler hallway conversations, the idea of hosting and leading Zoom meetings, virtual meetings, that has really thrown the game a bit. And so even acknowledging that and just saying, hey, this is really uncomfortable, and approaching it from a posture of humility is really helpful. The second would be adaptable. VUCAworld.org, we'll talk more about VUCA later. They state it this way. Angie, you said it through Peter Drucker's statement earlier. Best practice was yesterday. Best thinking is in demand today and tomorrow. It's illogical to look at today's paradigm through yesterday's point of reference because the context has entirely changed. We see this all over the place. And so adaptability, meaning that we're receiving new information, which is informing our thinking, which is adapting our context and our approaches. So essentially that model that you had going that was working really strong for a long time might need to be revisited. Leadership is about adapting to the new landscape, context, and defining what is while forecasting what will be. It's disorienting and requires an external agility that is grounded in ancient truth. So for those of you that are in the Christian space, in whatever market that might be, I would say that the hope that we bring, and this is an opportunity where Christian leaders really have, is that we are grounded from ancient truths, which are not changing. And this is a moment where those anchors of our faith and those tenets of our faith really emerge, while everything else is quite malleable around that. This is a moment, I believe, this is just my own perspective, that Christian leaders should really arise from our DNA. This is who we are. This is who we are commissioned to be. We are a sent and scattered people. And so therefore we build futures that have not yet been seen. We are a people of the future, but that means that we cannot cling to non-essentials from our past. And that's a really great, just a moment of even inventory in your organizational context, which is what is not essential to your mission. What is not essential to accomplishing the centrality of why you exist as an organization. The next would be visionary. And this is really redefined. Historically, vision was defined really one-dimensionally. And so this would be the metaphor that I would kind of give you for what visionary looks like in this context. It's that this is charting the course through wisdom from hindsight, keen insight, and prophetic foresight. This is really where, as Pentecostals, we have that super PAC of being engaged actively with the work of the Holy Spirit and the incarnational expression of Christ alive and at work in the world, in our context and in our community. Margaret Wheatley says this: it is possible to prepare for the future without knowing what will be. The primary way to prepare for the unknown is to attend to the quality of our relationships, to do well with what we know and how to trust one another. And that comes out of her work in When Change is Out of Control, which really speaks to and just dovetails back to what Angie unpacked around emotional intelligence. We cannot drift too far from doing great relationships in the middle of our organizational change. And lastly would be to stay engaged. I will say this in part confession and part challenge to you. It's so easy to want to tap out of the relational work that leadership requires of us. You just get tired, you get exhausted if you don't have really good margin in your life and really good rhythms and cadences. It just becomes, you can become really weary. And so I love Todd Bolsinger's work around this through his book, Canoeing the Mountains. If you've not read it, I would say definitely get your hands on that. And so he has a quote that really summarizes this. Relational congruence is the ability to be fundamentally the same person with the same values in every relationship, in every circumstance, and especially amidst crisis. It is the internal capacity to keep promises to God, to self, and to one's relationships that consistently express one's identity and values in spiritually and emotionally healthy ways. Relational congruence is about our consistency and care at the same time. It's about both character and affection and self-knowledge and authentic self-expression. Relational congruence is the leader's ability to cultivate strong, healthy, caring relationships, maintaining healthy boundaries, and communicating clear expectations, all the while focused on mission. I couldn't have said it better, so I just quoted him because he summarized it so well. We have to stay engaged. Steady leadership in an unsteady world. 1 Corinthians 15 says, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. I would say this as an encouragement. As you're moving through that change model and you hit that place of experimentation, there was a small aerospace company in San Diego, California that had a problem. They were trying to find a solution for how water affected metal. They were having rust issues, and so they began to experiment, and they needed a lubricant for their machinery to adapt to the movement and protect it from the external elements. On the 40th try, they perfected the formula. This is now known as water displacement 40, or better and more commonly known as WD-40. Most of you are familiar with WD-40. This is a product that is a household name. It's no longer just in the aerospace industry. It has actually innovated and revolutionized how we do everything in terms of home care and kind of DIY projects. Some of our organizations need organizational WD-40 to adapt to an ever-moving context. And it took the small aerospace company 39 tries before they got to the 40th when they perfected it. It takes 39 failures before they cracked the code on innovation, adaptation, and then securing a future. It will take time before you crack the code on experimentation. So I would say evaluate where in your organization you need to maybe have a WD-40 sort of mindset around that. Angie, I'm going to hand it over to you for the next point.
Wendy, thank you so much for that. That was incredible. And I think to bring it down, and when we think about adaptability, we think about humility, let's bring this down to the life of the leader, the life of the student. I know we have many young leaders on this call as well. What does it mean to have a WD-40 mindset as a person? What do we need to change in our own lives? And I will say that this is interesting because, you know, you and I, Wendy, we're Enneagram 8s, Lena's an 8. Change for us, I kind of love it. I kind of am all about challenge and rethinking how things have been done, but that's not everybody. So this change process is really challenging for a lot of people that are like, I just want to hold on to the way I've always done things. The problem is, it's not the way of the kingdom. The kingdom is always evolving, changing, and I love what you said. What did you say? That we are born to be sent and scattered. So we need, I think, that EI, that emotional piece, to be really shored up for a lot of us, and also for leaders that are ahead of the curve and are adapting, having grace and to help move people along. And everyone's facing it. Isn't that interesting in this time that everyone is facing change and challenge? And, you know, education is experiencing its own revolution. It was forced, but it's needed to happen for a very long time. I mean, I read the Chronicle of Higher Ed, Inside Higher Ed, and they've been talking about how is education going to evolve like 10 years ago, and everyone just kept staying the course. Now we are forced to change and adapt, and I think it's actually going to serve the world and the kingdom even more. But number 3, the third skill, and I think for all of us, we have to own this today, is courageous communication. To be a great leader, flat out, the best in the world will say this, we have to start taking 100% responsibility. The blame game doesn't work. We hear it all the time in the news. We've seen communication that has been really effective. We've also seen communication in the last 6 months that has been a complete disaster. The benefit of being a smaller university is I get to watch the bigger universities and how they communicate, and I get to learn and see, you know, how should we do this? How should we do that? It's been an incredible time where that has required a lot of humility. But I will say that if you want to be effective, we need to get our communication on. So Forbes published an article in May, and one of the quotes was this: now more than ever, it is important for leaders to have strong and effective communication skills. Constant changes to the business will impact a vast number of stakeholders who must all be kept in the know. Now, I think this next section might save a marriage here and there today because communication is essential in all areas of our lives. But for us as leaders, this is absolutely key. And I just want to, some of you can probably think of some organizations right now that has done really well with communications, but I don't know if you saw the news, but the first day of school, Zoom had a major fail. It crashed. In fact, it faced its biggest test. And what is Zoom going to do? I remember hearing about it in the morning, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a nightmare. Thank God it's not me. Anyone agree? Yeah. So what was so incredible, by the end of the week, Inc.com, and maybe we can throw it in the chat box, published an article and said, it's titled, this article, Zoom just failed its biggest test. Its apology is an extraordinary example of emotional intelligence. The company's outage as millions of students started school was bad, but the apology was brilliant. And I'm going to read it here for you in just a minute. See, this is a season that no one knows what they're doing, right? Can I get an amen? I meet with presidents of universities that have been doing it for years, and you know what? They're learning too. So I just want you all to just give yourself a little pat on the back, a little hug, and say, you're doing good, keep going. We're all learning, but the key is we must learn. So Zoom learned, and this is what they said that we can take an example from. This is what the CEO said. We always take very seriously our responsibility to keep you connected, and we know that you are relying on this during particularly challenging time. We deeply regret this incident and sincerely apologize. I'm personally disappointed that we have let you down, and I'm sorry for any inconvenience this may have caused you. I'm proud of our dedicated team working to enable our customers' work, schooling, and social lives during this global health crisis. And he goes on to thank them for their support. What was the most important part of that communique? Was this: I'm here to get this right, and I personally will do my best to prevent disruptions like this from happening in the future. That's it. It's taking responsibility. So I think as leaders, we need to understand that those that follow us and those we serve need our presence. They need our connection. And let's go to the next slide. I'm going to break it down a little bit to give you some real actionable next steps. Number one, I want to encourage us all, and I'm preaching to myself, is we must be proactive with our communication. I mean, when Andy Stanley came out with his announcement July 15th, and he literally in a video was proactive and said, we are going to be online till the end of the year. We may return in January. What he did, he modeled the way of proactive communication. And what that did immediately is it reduced anxiety for everyone that he was serving. Now, it probably wasn't the best news for a lot of people and most pastors, but what he did is he led. And whether it's the right decision or not really is irrelevant. He communicated and he made a decision, and that brings stability. Number two, personalized communication is key. Gone are the days of mass emails, mass communications to students. We need to be personal. And one of our campus pastor, Dan Fernandez, he's been talking to some leaders about this, is get personal. Send that text message. Send that video. I have a mentor on this call that even reminded me early this week that says, Angie, people want to hear from you. Not just a generalized, organization. And that's humbling, isn't it? It's a little scary. But connect, personalize your communication. And number three, let it be platformed in multiple ways. We have text, we have email, we have social platforms. Now's the time to use those tools that you have. So there really is no excuse to not get together, to not communicate. Get on FaceTime, get on Zoom. Credibility, John Maxwell says, is the leader's currency. With it, he or she is solvent. Without it, he or she is bankrupt. So I want to break it down just a little more, just 4 tips that I think can really help you in this season. And again, if you apply just one different strategy, even today, you're going to notice a ripple effect of improvement. Change starts with one small action. So let's get to it. Number 1, crisis communication. We must be emotionally intelligent and speak to the needs. Give people what they need. People's information needs actually evolve around crisis. So your message is going to change maybe in 24 hours, but continue to communicate. So should a good communicator's message. So that needs to change the timing, the way, and the message itself. Help listeners stay safe, stay informed, stay connected to purpose. Speak to needs. Number 2, communicate with clarity. Sometimes less is more. And repeat yourself often. Talking points, they're really important. And also anticipating needs. What questions may students have? I'm talking like in the context of students. When we had to move everyone online, when we had to throw 150 classes online, when we had to send students home, we had to communicate often what was happening. And again, we have not gone this way before. We also had to anticipate refunds, parent complaints, financial aid, retention. What about the fall? And so you have to always be 10 steps ahead, again, anticipating needs. So communicate with clarity and repeat often. Sometimes the same message every week until a new thing happens is good enough. It's important. Number 3, choose candor over charisma. People need hype, but people also need truth. Some of the news is pretty bad. Some of the news isn't fun. Admit it. Admit it's hard. Airbnb did that when they apologized to all their customers as well as their employees. They made some snafus like most companies have, but you know what? They owned it. Also, when Airbnb let many employees go, the CEO wrote a heartfelt letter and apologized personally. Heart is important, but don't withhold from being truthful and sharing hard things. People would rather be a part of what's really happening than be left in the dark and drinking the Kool-Aid. So be truthful, choose candor over charisma. And number 4, cultivate community as much as you can. I don't know about you, but in my organization and in my family, some of us are feeling more connected than ever. Why? Because we're actually doing more connection, more Zoom calls, more face-to-face. Take advantage of that. Also, instill confidence by continuing to present a clear vision, and also make sure that you connect what everyone's doing to meaning, because if it's just doing the work, really, what's the point? There's purpose involved, and you as a leader, as we each take 100% responsibility, we can make a dramatic change with number 3, courageous communication. So Wendy, what are your thoughts on that? I know you're a courageous leader and a communicator. So how has this worked for you? How have you been challenged in all of this?
Yeah, Angie, those are so good. I hope everybody was taking notes on that. I want to circle back to the first one that you talked about, which is the apology. Gosh, that link, the article was put in the chat box. I mean, especially I'm going to speak to pastors, learn how to apologize, take that as a template and like just then begin to craft that, because I think that's I broker conflict for a living. So, you know, I mediate a lot of conflict, and so often at the end of it, it's because we did not issue a full and whole apology. We said something to the effect of, I'm so sorry you feel this way, which just creates more conflict. So that was key. The other thing I loved, and I watched Andy do that when they released that video, it was like 2 minutes and 37 seconds. And he broke down a theological perspective. He broke down a strategic leadership decision, and then he gave them a pathway forward, which then just brought, even though people didn't agree with the decision, it reduced the emotional anxiety of the moment. And I would say to so many church leaders, your congregations are going through it, your staff is going through it. The more decisions that can be made proactively helps to just kind of like bring down the anxiety a little bit, which is so helpful for everyone. Those are fantastic. Fantastic.
Awesome. Well, you are going to top this off with the 4th skill. Go for it.
Thank you. Okay, adaptability in a VUCA world. Quick flyover. VUCA is an acronym. It was established a while back through some work that Warren Bennis and Bert Nanos did. And it's an acronym that normally stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. There's lots of work around that. There's VUCAworld.org. It's a great resource. I would say get well acclimated with those 4 components, because they definitely apply today. For the purposes of this dialogue, we're going to just reframe and redefine the acronym. One of the things that Angie and I were talking about that is just from our perspectives, that so many of us are news fatigued. Like there's a lot of bad things that are legitimate and real, and oftentimes even beyond our scope of resolving, that are coming in through our information channels daily. That has a real effect in the condition of our own soul and how we can even steward our emotional health. And so we thought for this dialogue, we really wanted to bring hope and to bring really a way forward that could not only inspire, but motivate you, like it's going to be okay. We're going to find our way through this together. Angie, I got to watch her I think it was a chapel right at the beginning of COVID. And she got up in front of the students and she addressed the students so beautifully. And at the end of it, she said, okay, do you feel mothered? Awesome. Do you feel fathered? Awesome. Do you feel led? Awesome. And then she just kind of summed up the conversation with like, we have hit all of the demographics of leadership at this season of your life that are so pertinent to where you're coming from. It was brilliant. So well done. Okay, so VUCA redefined: visionary, understanding, courageous, and adaptable. There's clearly some themes to all that we're sharing with you today, because these are like the necessary skills in our tool belt for the trek ahead. Visionary, man, we got to be able to see through the chaos. Leaders today more than ever who can see through the complexity and keep the main thing, keep it simple, get back to your essentials, to your organizational mission, get back to the essentials for why are you opening your doors? Why do you exist? Why does your organization contribute to its community? That is so critical for leaders to have clarity around that. This is probably not the day to have a big vision of expansion and innovation, in the sense of like, we're not going to be introducing new programming per se, but we do need to have a vision that continues to extend the mission of the organization. Understanding this really is intel. This is a moment where we cannot rely on boardroom assumptions about the condition of our people. We need to get in the field, in the trenches, and actually have real-time, in-depth understanding of the health of our organizations. This means that as leaders, we've got to be really comfortable, and I would say beyond comfort, proactively recruiting that feedback from second, third, fourth tier leaders within the organization. What's it like to work here? What's it like to serve here? What's it like to be a student here? What is it like? What is your experience like? Angie, I love this about you, because in every conversation, you are constantly inviting feedback, which I know helps you inform your strategic decisions. Too many times we're in a boardroom, we're in a meeting room, and we're having conversations about decisions that affect people. And here's the problem: the people whom the decisions affect are actually not a part of that dialogue. They're not included in that conversation. And it doesn't mean that the decision would change, but it certainly means that at least you're going to have more intel on how to know where your resistance points are going to be. You're going to have better intel about knowing what barriers you're going to have to overcome, what stakeholders you're going to have to go and have sub conversations with to begin to enfranchise them to the direction. And so that in-depth organizational understanding is so critical right now. Knowing your customer base, knowing your audience, and listen to views that do not reinforce your own ideas. This is like leadership kryptonite. We find people who think like us, who see the world like us, and then we affirm all of our own biases. Hashtag social media is a really great platform that just echoes what you already think. Everything is tracked through algorithms, and it just feeds you more of what you already believe. Super healthy to actually have a dialogue with someone who doesn't see the world the way you do. You can learn a lot. Courage. Angie, you talked about this so beautifully. If there is one quality that is rising up to the top, it's that courageous leadership, risk-taking, making bold moves, not needing to, and they're measured, right? So you exercise courage with measured risk. Especially the more that you have to steward, you have to have measured risk, but you've got to have the courage to make bold moves and to be able to stand out in front in a way that you are brokering people to the end of working towards peace and working towards mission and expanding whatever direction that is you're taking things, but also that you understand that you're the leader. So it has to stop with you. We can't defer responsibility. We can't abdicate any responsibility. Ultimately, it's like, this is on your watch. This is on my watch. We've got to own it. Doesn't really even matter how we got here. We just have to define what is and be courageous enough to move forward. And lastly would be adaptability. You're going to hear this echo again. There are certain temperaments that are actually hardwired in how you're shaped and how you process information that do better with adaptability. You have a natural bias towards that. And others need more information, so it's a little more difficult to become adaptable because you need more data before you can adapt. And so this is an opportunity for us to have flexible tactics, flexible strategies, really thinking about our strategic plans as living documents that are being informed as the landscape is continually changing, and that we're agile enough to make adjustments along the road, and having multiple contingency plans. Like A is a good idea, maybe it's your best idea, but we also have to have plans B, C, and D in order to be able to have the contingency of like when something else doesn't go the way we thought. Hashtag 2020, no one saw this. In January, pastors were preaching about vision and clarity, and we know where we're going, and we're taking this next thing. And then COVID hit. And didn't anybody see that coming? In January, I promise, nobody was actually forecasting a global pandemic. And yet here we are in September, still finding our way through, and now adding external factors, fires, floods, hurricanes. I mean, it's just always, it's like coming in waves. So we have to have multiple contingency plans about how we're going to navigate through. So VUCA redefined, a little recap: visionary, understanding, courageous, and adaptable.
So good, Wendy. So good. You know, I was thinking, you know, a lot of these skills were needed pre-COVID. And now we have no choice. I mean, we as leaders we have to radically accept. We have to move through grief and say, this is our new reality. It's like adapt or perish. I mean, really, we are seeing organizations and companies and churches close. And so this is a time to reinvent. And I just so appreciate what you bring. Wendy, you model this in your life. You model all of the VUCA, the way that you redefined it. And the Foursquare Church is blessed to have you leading our national Foursquare Church. So how many of you love that today? I thought what we could do is maybe answer a few questions. I've got a couple here, but if you have a question and you're here, wherever you are in the US, we want you to just drop it in the chat box. We would love to answer that question. But number one, I guess, Wendy, for you, how can we as leaders, and I can help answer this too, increase emotional intelligence and empathy? How do you think about that?
There's so many great tools, which goes back to becoming a learner. And so EQI is a great starting place. It helps you to identify where you are and clarify opportunities for growth. And it gives you then some now areas that you can begin to lean into that you can expand your capacities in. Especially in the Christian sector, we function heavy on the culture of niceness. And then we substitute niceness for a multitude of fruit that is not actually always transferable, and they're definitely not the same things. And so we don't always practice truth and courage like we practice niceness. Ironically, niceness is not a spiritual fruit. And so we have a culture of niceness that doesn't always align us with really how God defines, you know, what are the fruits of the Spirit evident at work in my life.
So good. You know, you talked about courage, you talked about truth. I think we just got to get honest with ourselves. And the way that you do that is not by guessing. It's like when we don't want to get on the scale, just get on that scale. Just take the EQI test, take the Enneagram, take the Myers-Briggs, get that self-awareness. That's the first core competency of emotional intelligence. If you don't know who you are, how are you going to lead anybody? So that's where I would begin with EI, is take the assessments, Google it, read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzaro is a great foundational book. Almost everyone I hire has to read that book, or, you know, I can't work with them. We have to work with emotionally healthy people. So I would really encourage those, you know, foundational first steps. Wendy, how do you help your team? And in the past, I mean, you led multi-campuses when you worked with Pastor James Ranger. Love them. and as you were supervisor in the Mid-South, how do you help your teams become adaptable when maybe they're overwhelmed with change? You're like 10 steps ahead of everyone.
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question, Angie. I'd love to have your perspective on this too. I think what becomes evident in working with me, and probably who actually would better answer this is like previous staff, current staff kind of situation, is to work with me means that you're committing to a transformative journey. And I'm really upfront about that. We are not going to stay who we are. That's a mutually reciprocal commitment. That means I am not staying who I am when we start day one, and however long it is that we are going to be functioning in this organizational dynamic together means that we are going to have integral checkpoints of transformation. So I think we have to be clear up front about what the expectations are. And the expectation to serve alongside of me is not comfort. Our expectation is that we are going to be on mission, which means that we are going to be transforming, which means that there is going to certainly be change involved in that process. And so,
and your organization or what your team it might not be for everyone, and that's perfectly okay. And then people can move on and find their best fit. Bruce, you had a question. How do you help folks in your organization who are stuck in an expert mindset to transition to the position of humble learning? So I think that's a great question. How do you bring someone from unconscious incompetence, right, to conscious incompetence? It's a really, really important thing. What do you think, Wendy?
That is such a great thing, because unconscious incompetence is actually, as it's defined, as unconscious. So you are not aware that you are incompetent. So for me, a strategy that I use is I will intentionally position someone in a project, an assignment, in probably not a role, but a project or assignment or a task that is beyond their levels of competence, and increase accountability and points of measurement. And so that is a really great discovery place for someone to discover for themselves, like, oh, hey, I don't know it all. The other part I would say is, if you are in a position of authority, I think we have to own the responsibility about being clear about cultural values to an organization's mission, and holding ourselves and everyone that we have on deck to those values. So if you're clear about that, and if you have good points of accountability, now you've got some measurements to be able to hold people to that.
Absolutely. So if you have people that are in fixed mindsets versus growth mindset, then there has been a culture that has propagated that. And that's where, again, leaders must take 100% responsibility for almost everything, right? And if you have a culture where there's fixed mindset, there was some breakdown, there was some gap in leadership, accountability, culture. These things are so important. I also love the whole approach is exposure is really healthy. Exposure therapy, sometimes people need to be exposed with the truth, with the data, with the facts, no judgment attached, but adapt or perish in a lot of ways. And so that's where I think educating the team, building culture is going to be really important to bring people into reality to make change. Let's see, any other questions come up today?
Angie, we've got some questions. I'm going to flip some of these on you.
Yeah, let's do it.
You can answer.
We have like 2 minutes.
Great. So, okay, this is like a case study. So if you're a leader in an organization and you have other leaders over you, that's everybody. If you ever think you are the leader, or there's someone who is the leader, that's a figment. Someone always has somebody that they're responsible to. And those leaders don't have these skills. What do you do? How do you handle that?
Okay, so a shameless plug. So my sister wrote her master's project, her capstone, on followership. There's this great concept about leading up. So sometimes is what I've seen is most people, when they don't have a leader that is leveled up, they will then begin to blame the problems on the leader and not take 100% ownership of their area. So one is, you need to own your area. We've all worked with leaders like this, right? That we've struggled with, or we think should know more, or be doing something different. The goal is honor leadership, do the best you can in that context. If you're so frustrated, it's time to leave. And if you want to stay, lead up, help them lead better. Do it humbly, with respect, but lead up. It's the way that a good follower does it. Any other questions? Let's see. There's one here. My question is, are there any assessments or interact questions to gauge our vision, courage, understanding? If there is not, is there two question we can recommend to ask ourselves and spend time on? So basically to assess how courageous we are. Maybe I'll need a little clarification on that.
On the assessment side, there's several assessments. You can do EQI, you can do Myers-Briggs, you can do all kinds, Enneagram, which are all great starting points for self-identification. On the questions side, I would say get an executive coach. Coaches ask great questions, which will help you. There's lots of good books around coaching that will also frame good questions that you can ask yourself and also ask those around you on team.
So good, so good. Last question, how does confidence impact these 4 skills? How does confidence impact these 4 skills? That's a great question. I think, my opinion, confidence comes with competency, and you don't build competency without taking risk. I do everything afraid. I don't know if Wendy does the same thing, but I'd rather do it and mess up than not do it at all. And so really it's overcoming your own limitations, your own boundaries, and just going for it. And when you start winning, that builds confidence. So it's kind of how I live my life. Wendy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I live my life similarly. So I can enter any assignment, the one I'm currently appointed to, same way. I enter in about 60% competent, which automatically means I have 40% incompetence, and I'm really comfortable with that. So I don't try and like hide that. I just kind of put it on the table, let everybody know this is what is. It settles everybody down, and I just do it all afraid too. So I don't wait to become confident before I start doing the thing. And I'm always in a learner's seat by way in the nature of how leadership has been defined for me. But that works for me. It's actually a great asset. It's a skill of agility, and it just relaxes everybody because I don't need to be the expert. I'm really clear I'm not. And so therefore now we can just get back to working together and getting on mission.
Let's just do it. I think that actually connects to the last question of our day before we pass it off to Lena is, how do we work with people that we are incompatible with? How do we work with people? I think you kind of bring up the whole thing of humility, like this is who I am. These are my gaps. I'm not trying to prove anything. We're just trying to win together. But talk about that briefly, because we're incompatible with quite a lot of people in the world. I mean, it's just never going to be utopia.
Yeah. So I would say I'm probably incompatible with most people. As an Enneagram 8, we are not compatible by nature with a lot of people. So I've put that one to bed. I'm actually not looking for compatibility. I'm not looking for us to be complementary as much as I am for us to be aligned in integrated mission. And to be really aligned on the values of the culture of which we're building together, which now allows for diversity. So I'm actually looking intentionally by design for people who are opposite than me, because I think this then brings a collective expression on a team dynamic. So I don't know if I'm misunderstanding compatibility, and also because I work in a faith sector, I think this is actually the way of the cross, is that we are living surrendered to people who are not compatible with us. Like I would even say that's even true in marriage, right? My husband is not compatible with me, and yet together we are mutually submitted to our commitment of covenant and to working out the likeness of Christ in the context of our marriage.
Boom. That was outstanding. That's it. It's about values that root us together. Thank you so much, Wendy. You are a boss. You are amazing, and I've enjoyed our time together. Lena, I'm just so grateful that you hosted this, and thanks to all of our 100+ guests that joined us today and gave your lunchtime to be with us. So thank you all for coming. And Lena, it's all you.
Ladies, thank you so much. I was taking notes. I was texting friends. I was all over the place. And I feel like you took an hour's worth of information. Actually, you took 4 hours worth of information and tried to boil it down into Just 1 hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to send this to all of the attendees today in an email later. We'll get it all buttoned up and send it out. We'll also post it online on our YouTube channel so you can share it with your friends and family, leaders, and those you serve with. So I am blown away. I am walking away from this conversation wanting to grow. And you all inspire me. So thank you so much for giving us information, for giving us tools, and for encouraging us to bridge the leadership gap. If you have been on the call and you're like me and you've been inspired to grow, a couple of things that you can do. First, obviously, we are Life Pacific University. We have online degrees. You can start with nothing and end with a master's degree through Life Pacific University, getting your AA or your bachelor's degree or your master's degree. In fact, if you have a bachelor's degree and you're interested in pursuing a master's in leadership, like our friend Wendy Nolasco is doing right now, you can join a webinar that we're having next week so that you can get some information about it. We also have a webinar on our master's in theological studies, which takes not just theology, but it entwines education. So we teach you how to teach theology as well as spiritual development. So we have those happening next week that you can join. If you say, you know what, a degree is just too much for me right now, we get that. So we're doing some bite-sized things for you. We're doing some lead sessions. This is our first lead session. And on September 30th, we'd love for you to join us for AJ Swoboda, who is doing Outraged Us, Faithful Theology in an Emotional Age. Now, you're going to want to tune in for this because what AJ is going to be talking about is thinking about doing theology when everybody's expecting us to change it in the light of our cultural demands. How do we do theology in an emotional age and have it stay strong and sound? So join us for that. I am going to put in the chat a link if you are interested in our any education, figuring out how to do it. I'm your girl. I will take care of you. My job is to be a tour guide. We're going to figure out where you are and where you want to go, and I'll create a path for you to get there. Y'all, this has been so good. Angie and Wendy, thank you, thank you, thank you. You have been a blessing and encouragement, and you are spurring us to growth. So may you feel the Lord's presence today, panelists, attendees. May you know his truth. May you be encouraged in your own life, not just from this webinar, but may people be brought alongside you to encourage you where you are right now in Jesus' name. Can't wait to see y'all maybe next week at the info webinars or on the 30th with AJ Swoboda. Blessings on you.